Welcome to Certified Data Engineer Associate DEA-C01 Practice Exam number 15. You'll get 30 exam-style questions. I will read each question, then give you a 10-second countdown to review the answer choices on screen. Feel free to pause the video if you need longer. After each countdown, I will reveal the correct answer and explanation. Question 1. Adatum Inc. is building a serverless data processing pipeline using AWS step functions. The pipeline must process 500,000 JSON records stored in a single large CSV file in Amazon S3. Each record requires independent transformation via an AWS Lambda function. The processing must complete within 2 hours. Which step functions map state configuration should the data engineer use? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Distributed map state is designed for large-scale parallel processing and can read CSV files directly from Amazon S3 as input. It supports up to 10,000 parallel child workflow executions, each with its own execution history, making it ideal for processing 500,000 records within the time constraint. Inline map state is limited to 40 concurrent iterations and has a 25,000 execution history entry limit, which is far too restrictive for 500,000 records. The parallel state requires defining a fixed number of branches at design time and cannot dynamically iterate over records. Inline map state does not support max concurrency of 10,000 as it is capped at 40 concurrent iterations, and adding a pre-splitting Lambda adds unnecessary complexity. Question 2. A corporation stores large datasets on premises and wants to periodically copy this data to Amazon S3 to keep the S3 bucket synchronized with the latest on-premises data. Which AWS service is most suitable? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. AWS DataSync is purpose-built for automating and accelerating data movement between on-premises storage systems and AWS storage services including S3, supporting both one-time migrations and periodic scheduled transfers. It handles scheduling, monitoring, and data integrity verification automatically. AWS Glue is an ETL service designed for data preparation and analytics workflows, not for periodic file synchronization between on-premises and S3. AWS Storage Gateway is optimized for hybrid cloud access patterns where on-premises applications need seamless access to cloud storage, not for periodic batch replication. AWS Snowball is a physical device for large one-time data transfers and does not support automated periodic replication. Question 3. A data engineer at Northwind Retail is building a data pipeline using AWS Glue ETL. The source data in S3 contains nested JSON records with fields that sometimes appear as strings and other times as integers due to inconsistent source systems. The Glue job fails when encountering these ambiguous type fields. Which dynamic frame transformation should the data engineer use to resolve this issue? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Resolve choice is specifically designed to handle choice type ambiguities in dynamic frames, which occur when a field contains values of different data types across records. Resolve choice offers multiple strategies. Cast convert all values to a specified type. Make struct create a struct containing both types. Make calls create separate columns per type. And project retain only values matching a specified type. Apply mapping handles renaming and type casting of well-defined columns, but does not resolve type ambiguity within a single field. Relationalize is used to flatten nested structures into relational tables, not to resolve type conflicts. Filtering records would result in data loss and does not address the underlying schema inconsistency. Question 4. Fabricam Media has a data mesh architecture with 15 producer teams and 30 consumer teams across multiple AWS accounts. The central governance team spends significant time managing lake formation permissions as new tables and consumers are onboarded daily. They want to reduce permission management overhead while maintaining fine-grained access control. Which approach should the data engineer recommend? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. LF-tags with tag-based access control, LFTBAC, is the recommended approach for large-scale data governance because permissions are granted based on tag expressions rather than individual resource names. When new tables are created and tagged appropriately, consumers with matching tag-based grants automatically receive access without manual intervention. This scales efficiently across 15 producer teams and 30 consumer teams. IAM policies at the resource level become unmanageable at this scale and require updates for every new table. Named resource method requires explicit grants for each table consumer combination, creating the same overhead the team wants to eliminate. S3 bucket policies bypass lake formation's fine-grained access control capabilities, including row-level and column-level security. Question 5. A data engineer at Contoso Media operates an Amazon Aurora PostgreSQL database that serves as the backend for a web application. The application uses AWS Lambda functions to query the database. During peak traffic periods, the Lambda functions exhaust the database connection pool, causing connection timeout errors. Which solution addresses this issue with the least operational overhead? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Amazon RDS Proxy is a fully managed database proxy that sits between application code and the database, providing connection pooling and multiplexing. It maintains a pool of established database connections and shares them across Lambda invocations, dramatically reducing the number of connections to Aurora. RDS Proxy also provides up to 66% faster failover. Implementing connection pooling within Lambda functions is ineffective because each Lambda execution environment maintains its own connections, and the ephemeral nature of Lambda means connections cannot be reliably shared across invocations. Increasing max connections has limits based on instance memory and can degrade database performance. While the Aurora Data API eliminates persistent connections, it adds latency per query and has lower throughput compared to RDS Proxy for high concurrency workloads. Question 6. A data engineer at Tailspin Corp is designing a real-time data pipeline using Amazon Kinesis data streams. The stream receives clickstream data with user ID as the partition key. During a flash sale event, one particular user generates 50% of all traffic, causing a single shard to become overwhelmed while other shards remain underutilized. What should the engineer do to resolve this hot shard problem? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Adding a random suffix to the partition key, for example, appending a random number between 1-10 to the user ID, distributes the high-volume user's records across multiple shards based on the MD5 hash of the modified partition key. This directly addresses the hot shard problem by preventing all records with the same partition key from being routed to a single shard. Enhanced fanout increases read throughput per consumer, but does not address write throughput limits on a hot shard. On-demand mode scales based on overall stream utilization, but it cannot redistribute traffic caused by a single dominant partition key. Simply adding more shards increases total capacity, but does not solve the fundamental problem of one partition key routing all its records to the same shard. Question 7. A data engineer at a multinational company needs centralized metadata management across semi-structured and unstructured data, including CSV, JSON, XML, and DocumentDB NoSQL data, with automatic catalog updates and minimal manual intervention. Which solution requires the least operational overhead? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. The AWS Glue Data Catalog is a fully managed serverless metadata store that integrates with Glue crawlers, which automatically connect to data sources, detect file schemas using built-in classifiers for CSV, JSON, XML, and other formats, and create or update table definitions. Crawlers detect schema changes between runs without requiring custom code, ensuring the catalog reflects the current structure of each data source. Scheduling crawlers through the Glue console requires no external orchestration. Amazon DocumentDB is a document database not designed for metadata cataloging. Building a catalog on it requires custom Lambda functions to discover schemas from each source type, parse them, and maintain the catalog structure, adding significant development and maintenance burden for every supported format. Glue ETL jobs for schema extraction require writing custom extraction logic for each source format and managing a separate storage and query layer for the metadata, with ongoing code maintenance whenever source schemas change. MongoDB as a catalog requires the same custom development effort as DocumentDB, with the additional burden of managing a MongoDB deployment outside of the managed AWS service ecosystem. Question 8. Fabricam Financial has an Amazon Aurora PostgreSQL global database with a primary cluster in AWS-1 and a secondary cluster in EUS-1. During a disaster recovery test, the team needs to promote the EUS-1 secondary cluster to become the new primary. After promotion, the old primary in AWS-1 should become a secondary. What is the correct procedure? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Aurora Global Database supports a managed plan failover process, also called managed switchover, that promotes a secondary region cluster to primary while simultaneously demoting the old primary to secondary, maintaining the global database topology. This process ensures minimal downtime and preserves the replication relationship without manual intervention. Detaching the secondary makes it a standalone cluster and breaks the global database relationship, requiring manual reconstruction. Deleting the primary cluster is destructive, unnecessary, and does not automatically promote the secondary. Aurora Global Database does not have a global database endpoint that can be simply redirected to switch roles between clusters. Question 9. Litware Manufacturing uses Amazon CloudTrail to monitor their AWS environment. The security team needs to investigate API calls made to their S3 data lake buckets over the past 6 months using SQL queries. The team also wants to retain this audit data for 7 years for compliance purposes. Which solution meets these requirements with the least operational overhead? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. CloudTrail Lake provides a managed SQL query engine specifically designed for querying CloudTrail event data. Event data stores can be configured with retention periods up to 10 years, using 1-year extendable pricing or 7-year retention pricing, meeting the 7-year compliance requirement. CloudTrail Lake natively supports SQL queries against the stored events without requiring external query infrastructure. Using Athena to query CloudTrail logs in S3 is a valid approach, but requires additional setup for partitioning, schema management, and lifecycle policies, adding more operational overhead than CloudTrail Lake's managed solution. CloudTrail Insights detects unusual API activity patterns, but does not provide SQL query capabilities for detailed forensic investigation of specific API calls. Streaming to Kinesis and Redshift adds significant infrastructure complexity and cost for a use case that CloudTrail Lake handles natively. Question 10. Litware Analytics has a data lake with over 10 million partitions in a single AWS Glue data catalog table. Data engineers report that Athena queries are slow due to the time spent retrieving partition metadata. The engineers want to reduce query latency without changing the data layout or partitioning scheme. Which 2 actions should the data engineer take to optimize partition metadata retrieval? Select 2, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. Partition projection eliminates getPartition's API calls to the Glue data catalog entirely by calculating partition values and locations in memory based on table properties, dramatically reducing query planning time for highly partitioned tables. Partition indexes in the Glue data catalog enable server-side partition pruning, which is critical for tables with millions of partitions because it filters partitions on the catalog side before returning results. Converting to a managed table with compaction does not address partition metadata retrieval latency. Running MSCK repair table before each query adds overhead rather than reducing it and is used for partition registration, not optimization. Migrating to iceberg format requires significant data restructuring, which contradicts the requirement of not changing the data layout. Question 11. A Datum Corp needs to migrate 50 TB of data from an on-premises Hadoop HDFS cluster to Amazon S3 within a 2-week window. The on-premises data center has a 1 Gbps direct connect link to AWS. The data engineer must ensure data integrity during transfer and minimize operational effort. Which service should the engineer use? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. AWS DataSync supports HDFS as a source and can transfer data at speeds up to 10 Gbps with an on-premises agent. Over a 1 Gbps direct connect link, DataSync can transfer approximately 50 TB in about 5 days, well within the 2-week window. DataSync includes built-in data integrity verification via checksums, scheduling, bandwidth throttling, and requires minimal operational effort. Snowball Edge would work, but physical shipping and device handling takes several days for logistics alone and is better suited when network bandwidth is insufficient. AWS DMS is designed for database migration with CDC capabilities, not for transferring HDFS file data to S3. A custom multi-part upload script requires significant development effort, manual error handling, retry logic, and integrity verification that DataSync provides natively. Question 12. A data engineer at Contoso Logistics is building a CDC pipeline from an Amazon RDS MySQL source to an S3 data lake using AWS DMS. The source tables contain blob columns storing shipment images averaging 5 MB each. During full load migration, the task runs significantly slower than expected and eventually fails with memory errors on the replication instance. Which DMS configuration change resolves this issue while maintaining data completeness? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Inline lob mode is the most efficient approach for migrating lob data with a known maximum size. It transfers lob values inline with other column data up to the specified inline size, avoiding the separate lookup operations required by full lob mode. Setting the inline lob size slightly above 5 MB ensures all shipment images are transferred inline, providing faster performance than full lob mode while maintaining data completeness. Limited lob mode truncates lob values that exceed the specified size, which risks data loss if any images exceed 5 MB. Full lob mode transfers complete lob data but uses separate lookups for each lob column in each row, which is significantly slower and consumes more memory on the replication instance. Excluding blob columns requires building a separate data transfer mechanism and breaks the atomic migration guarantee. Question 13. Northwind Publishing uses AWS Glue ETL jobs to process daily content feeds. The source data occasionally contains columns where the same field appears as both a string and an integer across different records. The Glue job fails when writing to the target Redshift table because of these type inconsistencies. Which dynamic frame method should the data engineer use to handle this schema inconsistency? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Resolve choice is specifically designed to handle choice types in dynamic frames, which occur when the same field has different data types across records. The cast action resolves the ambiguity by converting all values to a single specified type, for example, cast string. Other resolve choice actions include make struct, represent as struct with both types, make calls, create separate columns per type, and project all values to one type. Apply mapping handles renaming and type casting for well-defined columns, but does not resolve choice types where a single column has multiple types. Relationalize is for flattening nested structures, not resolving type ambiguities. Filtering out records discards valid data rather than resolving the type inconsistency. Question 14. Contoso Genomics runs an Amazon EMR cluster to process large genomic datasets. The cluster has 3 core nodes and 20 task nodes. To reduce costs, the team wants to use spot instances. Which node configuration follows AWS best practices for reliability and cost optimization? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. AWS best practice is to use on-demand instances for primary and core nodes, and spot instances for task nodes only. Core nodes store HDFS data, so losing a core node to spot interruption risks HDFS data loss and cluster instability. Task nodes only run processing tasks without storing HDFS data, making them ideal for spot instances. If interrupted, the work is simply reassigned to other nodes. Using Spot for core nodes risks data loss because core nodes host HDFS data node services. Using Spot for all nodes, including the primary node, risks complete cluster failure if the primary node is reclaimed. Reserved instances for the primary node provide cost savings, but core nodes on Spot still pose the HDFS data loss risk. Question 15. A data analytics company experiences irregularities in AWS Glue ETL job execution times and wants to identify root causes with the most detailed analysis. Which method provides the most comprehensive performance data? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. The AWS Glue Job Profiler captures granular execution metrics including executor allocation over time, data processing rates, shuffle read and write volumes, memory utilization, and the ratio of active versus idle executors during each job run. When integrated with CloudWatch, Glue creates dedicated log groups containing structured performance records that enable cross-run comparisons and trend analysis. This combination provides the deepest available view into where ETL bottlenecks occur. CloudTrail data events record API-level interactions, such as S3 object reads and Lambda invocations. They capture metadata about service calls, but do not provide the job-level performance metrics needed to diagnose ETL execution time irregularities. X-ray traces requests through distributed applications to identify latency in service-to-service calls, and is designed for microservice debugging, not for profiling data processing throughput in Spark-based ETL jobs. Athena queries the data catalog for metadata about table schemas and partitions, but has no access to real-time Glue job execution metrics or historical performance data. Question 16. A data engineer needs to securely store database credentials used by multiple AWS Glue ETL jobs to connect to an Amazon RDS PostgreSQL instance. The credentials must be rotated automatically every 30 days without requiring code changes to the Glue jobs. Which approach should the data engineer implement? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. AWS Secrets Manager supports automatic credential rotation via Lambda rotation functions with native integration for RDS databases, including PostgreSQL. Credentials are rotated without requiring application changes. creating a glue connection that references secrets manager and granting the glue job IAM role permission to retrieve the secret ensures glue jobs can access the credentials securely at runtime. Systems Manager Parameter Store does not have built-in automatic rotation capability. Hard-coding credentials in scripts is a security anti-pattern regardless of encryption. Storing credentials in S3 lacks automatic rotation and requires manual credential management. Question 17. A data engineer at Contoso Media needs to implement a near real-time pipeline that ingests application events from Amazon Kinesis data streams, enriches them with user profile data from DynamoDB, and delivers the enriched events to Amazon S3 in Apache Parquet format partitioned by event type and date. Which architecture meets these requirements with the least operational overhead? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Amazon Data Firehose provides the least operational overhead for this use case. It natively supports KDS as a source Lambda transformation for enriching records with DynamoDB data, built-in format conversion from JSON to Parquet using a glue data catalog schema, and dynamic partitioning to create S3 prefixes based on event type and date. This is a fully managed service requiring no infrastructure provisioning or scaling management. Managed service for Apache Flink provides powerful stream processing, but requires writing and maintaining a Flink application, which adds significant development and operational overhead compared to Firehose configuration. Lambda consuming directly from KDS would require custom code for Parquet serialization and S3 file management, including handling small file problems and partitioning logic. Glue Spark streaming requires managing glue job configurations and monitoring, and adds more operational overhead than Firehose for a straightforward enrichment and delivery pipeline. Question 18. A data engineer at Fabricam Corp is designing an Amazon Redshift cluster for a workload that involves frequent joins between a large fact table, 500 GB, and a small dimension table, 50 MB. The dimension table is used in nearly every analytical query. The engineer wants to optimize join performance. Which combination of distribution and sort key strategies should be applied? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. For joins between a large fact table and a small dimension table, the optimal strategy is key distribution on the fact table using the join column and all distribution on the dimension table. All distribution places a complete copy of the small dimension table on every compute node, ensuring joins are always local without network data transfer. This is ideal for small tables under 1-2 GB that participate in frequent joins. Auto-sort keys let Redshift optimize sorting based on query patterns. Using key distribution on both tables collocates matching rows on the same node, but the small dimension table would have most rows on a few nodes, creating data skew. Even distribution on both tables forces data shuffling during every join since matching rows are not collocated. Relying entirely on auto distribution may not immediately select the optimal strategy and lacks the explicit optimization for this well-understood access pattern. Question 19. Contoso Manufacturing has an AWS Glue ETL job processing IoT sensor data from S3. The job reads Parquet files partitioned by plant ID and date. The Glue data catalog table has over 50,000 partitions. Athena queries against this table are slow due to the time spent retrieving partition metadata from the data catalog. Which two optimizations should the data engineer implement to reduce query latency? Select two. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. Partition projection eliminates getPartition API calls to the Glue data catalog by defining the partition scheme directly in table properties. Athena calculates partition values and locations in memory, dramatically reducing query planning time for tables with thousands of partitions. Partition indexes in the Glue data catalog optimize partition filtering operations, enabling efficient pruning when queries filter on indexed partition columns instead of scanning all 50,000 partitions. Converting Parquet to CSV would degrade query performance since Parquet is a columnar format optimized for analytical queries. Increasing Glue crawler DPUs improves crawl speed, but does not improve query time partition metadata retrieval. S3 intelligent tiering manages storage costs and does not affect S3 list operation or metadata retrieval performance. Question 20. An organization needs to track and log the daily load status of Amazon Redshift tables into a DynamoDB table for compliance auditing. Which solution correctly implements this? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. CloudTrail records all Redshift API calls, including data loading operations, capturing caller identity, timestamps, and request details. An event bridge rule can match specific Redshift events from CloudTrail with precise filtering, ensuring only relevant load-related API calls trigger the Lambda function that writes load statuses to DynamoDB. This creates a targeted, event-driven pipeline with minimal noise. Redshift event notifications are designed for cluster-level operational events such as hardware failures, maintenance, and configuration changes, not for application-level data load tracking within tables. Enabling CloudTrail management events without Event Bridge lacks the filtering mechanism to isolate specific Redshift load events. Without filtering, Lambda would need to evaluate every management event across all services, increasing cost and complexity. CloudWatch alarms monitor numeric metrics and thresholds, such as CPU utilization and connection counts, not the occurrence or status of specific data loading API calls. That is the end of practice exam number 15. Review the questions you missed, then come back for the next batch.